And good evening to all our fellow listeners and followers. This is Sunday, August 27th at 8:19 p.m. This is Federico Lines at States Res Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight we have two segments. We'll be talking about back-to-school spending control, and then we will be talking about a recap of the first GOP debate and our continuing discussion of 2024. With that said, it is kind of back to school season. This is a time parents are, sending their kids back into the hands of the government to mold their young minds. And basically, this is the time of year that, kids are going back to be trained how to be good little slaves to the system that we have today. This education is something that it's an issue that's very important to me, because I just see this being such an important issue, because we can see how the entitlement of the American people through this socialist system. And, one of the things I think of with government schooling is, I go back to the 1990s. Remember Hillary Clinton as First Lady at the time. She said it takes a village to raise a child. And, remember that comment spurred a lot of outrage by conservatives, and I think rightly so. I don't agree with what Hillary Clinton said, but the problem is, if you keep sending your kids to the public school system, which requires the government to steal money from your neighbors to subsidize what is your responsibility as a parent, you effectively are saying you agree with Hillary Clinton. As much as you complain about that statement, you actually agree with it. And this is something that I want to kind of just wake people up, especially the conservatives who, they say a lot of things that I can agree with, but then their actions prove otherwise, that they don't really believe what they're saying. They really believe in parents' rights and education, and I agree with that too. But as long as you keep supporting this system of the government running the schools and stealing money to subsidize what is your responsibility, you don't have a right in that system. You're putting it up to the majority. You've decided that democratically electing school board members is the way to set curriculums and standards in education. I mean, this is something that people need to wake up to, and if you really believe in parental rights in education, you have those. You can take your kids out of the system, put them in private school, you can homeschool. There are so many options you can do. But if you put your kids in the system, that's on you, the parents. And that's what I want. I want to wake people up to that.
Well, with Hillary's statement that it takes a village to raise a child, Anybody in the federal bureaucracy that Hillary Clinton was out of, and Hillary Clinton, George W. Bush, I don't mind government schools as how this republic was built, and I keep debating this with a friend of mine, not you. I mean, you're a good friend of mine, but another friend of mine, that he doesn't want government in schools, and that's not how this country was established. This country was established to not have federal intervention in our school system, in our education system. And because it's, unconstitutional, it's unwanted spending by the federal government, subsidized, as you said in your opening statement, said. But I don't mind if Florida has a education department, if Mississippi or whatever. I mean, it's up to the states to do it on their own without any federal government backing. And that's where we get to this problem where, we have this unwanted subsidies from the federal government going into schools in different areas For example, in Colorado, Littleton, Colorado, which is a very wealthy school system there, and they probably get a whole bunch of money from their Colorado congressional delegation into Littleton. But yet again, in Denver, Colorado, in the Denver area, their school system is bad. So you have a misappropriation there by the federal government, and also by, you're right, by local and county and state authorities on that. But, it must start in local and state, and federal government should not be involved in this. And this is where, Republicans failed to see this, as we saw in 2001 when George W. Bush enacted one of the largest school funding in U.S. history, called the No Child Left Behind Act. That Rick Santorum was one of the main proponents of that act, and now he's, back in telling states what to do and all that with the Convention of States project. So my main beef on this is that there is nothing constitutional that the federal government has to take care of the education system of the rest of the country, as well as healthcare. But right now we're talking about education system. I don't believe that my Florida taxpayer money needs to go to schools in New York or Illinois, and vice versa. For example, right now, just a natural aid relief fund. Governor DeSantis just declared Florida as a state of emergency due to tropical storm. I hope he doesn't call for federal aid relief, as I was very pushy that Hawaii doesn't do that. So, this is just, people need to understand how this country was established. There was no room for federal autocracy in the education system in America.
And that really is the starting point as the federal government. There is no constitutional authority for the federal government to be involved in education whatsoever. It's not in there. I would agree with you that state and local levels can do their own thing. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of it, even at the state and local level, but I understand people have to look at their state constitutions, and I know here in Illinois, where I live, they have constitutional authority in the state constitution to set up schools and stuff, but the federal government needs to be completely out of it. And one of the big problems is, I don't think a lot of people realize this, is I want to end the Department of Education as much as anybody. It has no constitutional authority, but the education dollars coming from the feds is all over the place. It's not just the Department of Education. There's Homeland Security grants going to schools. There's, FDA, there's CDC, there's USDA grants. Like every agency in Washington is sending these grants to public schools, and it all has to stop. There should be no federal funding. And, if we get to that point, people can start doing something at the state and local level. Like I said, for me, I think all government schooling is wrong, but yeah, I'm less offended by the state and local level doing something. And but I think people need to realize the history of education in America, that the system itself, and I've written about this, about a former New York State Teacher of the Year who quit his job, John Taylor Gatto, and he saw how corrupt the system was, and it's based on the Prussian model of education, where essentially they're training workers. They're not educating. They're not creating critical thinkers. They're creating workers for their corporate and government masters. That's what the education system has turned into. And throughout the majority of American history, we didn't have the school system that we have today. There were public schools that locally parents got together and they hired a teacher for their community and set up a little schoolhouse. But we didn't have the compulsory education laws until 1918 that compulsory education laws were across the country. Prior to that, most education was, dealt with locally, and, a lot of parents homeschooled their kids, they educated their kids, and, I just go back to, the founding fathers and that generation. A lot of the founding fathers didn't even have a formal education. They didn't, but they were highly literate. They were highly educated because they understood what education was back then, which was learning to read and learning to do trades and learning different skills and they didn't need this system of schooling to become educated. And I just want people to think about there are different ways that education can look, but as long as we keep looking at government to provide you with some entitlement to a quote unquote free education, and nothing's free, remember that when you get something, you get a good or service from the government, it's not free. You're stealing from somebody else in this country to help pay what you think you're entitled to. And it's just a simple philosophy for me that the parent is responsible for the education of their child, not the community, not the public. And we need to start understanding who's responsible.
No, you're right, and a couple of pointers to that. When you mentioned the massive federal government funding, and this is where the hypocrisy starts, where they abolish public prayer in school, and yet they have no problem extending their hand to receive funds on that, and that's where the hypocrisy starts. If you think public prayer is unconstitutional, education funding by the federal government is unconstitutional, and they should stop doing that. And I keep telling this story. When I was in private college in a private Catholic university, one of the professors was a priest, and he would lead a morning prayer before the class. And months, weeks later, I found out that the college, the university was trying to get a federal grant, and I'm saying, they're accepting federal money, and yet they have public prayer in the classrooms. Shouldn't that be unconstitutional to do that? And you can't be hypocritical in that. And that's where the hypocrisy starts. That they don't want to do this, but they'll extend the hand on the other hand with the other hand. So, and then your other topic on what was it? What was the other? You said a couple. You mentioned something else, and I'm drawing a blank. Well, you mentioned that on federal funding and all that, and I bring on that, but there was something else.
Was it just that basically all the agencies in Washington are sending money to schools. It's not just the Department of Education.
Oh! Now I remember what I was. Yeah, exactly. I know that you're not satisfied with state public education, and I sometimes agree with you sometimes, because sometimes when there's a monopoly in state education, the private school systems in many areas, particularly here in Dade County, they have very minimal private school institutions where their tuitions are just outrageously expensive. That's because you have a monopoly on public education. If they would get rid of that, if the state government would get rid of some of that public monopolies on education, then I would say that the private schooling ownership will go up and the tuitions will go down, and there'll be competition. Right now, there's no competition for private schools or even private colleges for that matter. So because you have here I'm not sure in Illinois, but here in South Florida, you have Dade County Community College, you have Florida International University, you have Florida State University, you have University of Central Florida, and yet there's only a few, University of Miami, St. Thomas University, Barry University, very little competition in private university. So, you got to think competition. You got to think of branching out of capitalism, and that's what it's killing us right now. But with this federal funding and state funding, you're just making a monopoly. And I thought liberals and progressives hated monopolies. They busted the Standard Oil Company. They busted all these Wall Street barons on their monopolies, and yet on education, they don't mind having monopolies. So, but with the founding fathers, you're right. There's only a few founding fathers that went to university. James Madison, I believe, went to King's College, which is now Columbia University. And I'm not sure where Thomas Jefferson went. George Washington went to private tutoring. But yeah, they knew how to learn how to read, and they had a nuclear family. Not only the founding fathers, but the heirs to the framers. They had a nuclear family where they taught their children how to read, and even in some households, they taught their servants how to read and all that, and all that. So it was a nuclear family that it starts with a family, and then it grows out local, but not to the extent of the federal government to extend that massive federal spending that's just outrageous.
Yeah, and on the idea of competition, I remember reading, and I just pulled up the article from Reason Magazine from several years ago about this guy named Bob Luddy, who was kind of a libertarian businessman from North Carolina, and he ran for school board because he saw how the public schools were just failing the students, and he ran for school board. He lost, so he decided to start his own charter school. And this is something people need to remember about charter schools. Charter schools are still government schools. It's still part of the public school system. And he realized with the charter school, like, hey, I'm basically still completely controlled by the state. I mean, you get maybe a smidge of independence here or there, but it's still completely controlled by the state. So what he decided to do was to start a low-cost private school there where it accepts no government funding at all. And basically, he started this private school that does not, that the tuition is, it's like a fraction of what the public school system is spending. And their kids are completely outperforming the public school kids. And this is one of the things because I've been covering local schools for quite a while here locally. And the idea that spending is the problem is, it just is something I don't know how to convince people that this is nonsense. I mean, the spending is outrageous on how much they're spending per student, and they are completely failing the kids. But this guy in North Carolina was able to educate kids for $5,300 to $6,000 a student, compared to $15,000 from the public school system, and they are completely outperforming the public school kids. And we've got to promote actual competitions. Like I said, the charter schools are not really competition, and it's still government schools. And the important thing here is just understanding, I hear a lot about school choice. That's a talking point of a lot of people. And in fact, there are people on both the so-called left and the so-called right who agree with school choice. Well, I believe in educational liberty, not school choice. Educational liberty, in my opinion, because liberty is where freedom and personal responsibility intersect. Once you have liberty, the choices are endless. That choice is an afterthought. But we need to understand who's responsible for the education of a child, and it's the parents. The parents are responsible, and it doesn't mean that you can't seek help from your friends and family and neighbors and stuff, but the government is force, and this is the big problem. The government's force, and we need to stop using government to create entitlements. We need parents to accept responsibility for educating their kids.
Yeah, and I would like to point out, many people have forgotten great statesmen. I'm not going to call them conservative or liberal or Republican or Democrat, just plain statesman that actually speaks highly on how America is and the responsibility that it bears to each individual state and community out there, parents. And I recommend people, also recommend people to read my book, but also to read this book in particular, The Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater. When I first read it, I was just amazed that, he wrote this book back in the 1960s, and it's still valuable to this day because there is a lack of a sense of entitlement and dependency that it's just outrageous. And I just want to read a paragraph on it, on his Some Notes on Education. The third objection to federal aid is that it promotes the idea that federal school money is free money and thus gives the people a distorted picture of the cost of education. I was distressed to find that 5 out of 6 high school and junior college students recently interviewed in Phoenix said they favored federal aid because it would mean more money for local schools and ease the financial burden on Arizona taxpayers. And that's what I'm trying to convey here. It's unfair from other states to come and release that burden on Arizona to pay for Arizona schools. It's unfair. As it's unfair that Arizona taxpayers pay for Nevada schools or wherever. It's not the responsibility of that. Each individual state is sovereign and independent, and each state has a legislature, has a governor. Just because he's president of the United States or Congress of the United States doesn't mean that they have the authority to pass this type of legislation on education, on healthcare, on whatever. So, it's a shame that Barry Goldwater didn't quite make it to the White House. I think he would have been a very great president, better than Richard Nixon for that matter, because, people are too scared of the truth. But it's quite simple. Congress does not have just because it's called Congress of the United States doesn't mean that they are entitled to pass this funding wherever they please to wherever and whenever, like Daniel Boone said, it's not yours to give. It's not your money to give it to Peter, to rob from Peter to give to Paul. So that's one, message I want to convey to people, that it's unfair for Arizona to receive, to get this money, and vice versa. Arizona gives money to somewhere else. So that's the main thing I want to really convey here, that there is no authority in the Congress of the United States to give this money. And just one short anecdote, Seth. When I went to Europe, I think 4 years ago, 2019, June of 2019, my mother, bless her heart, she's a bit of a Trump supporter. I don't know why, but she is. She was talking to our tourist driver. He was from Croatia, and my mother was saying, what a great president Donald Trump is, and blah blah blah, and I had to stop her one way or another because I don't want her to confuse this nice young man that is getting the wrong picture of the United States. So when I told him what the duties of Congress is, and he goes, yes, but aren't you called the United States of America? And I go, yes and no. We are the United States of America. We are sovereign United States of America. Each state is independent from the federal government. The federal government has very distinct powers on what they do. And I told them education, healthcare, immigration, naturalization is not part of those powers as you have in Croatia, because he mentioned that his grandmother lived under Tito. We don't want that type of Tito in the White House. It's not written in the Constitution to have a Tito or a Stalin or whoever. So this thing of a central autocracy that they're trying to fit in, it's not for us. It never has been us. It's never part of the United States government to play this central autocratic government.
Yeah, and on that, I think people need to understand how the Republican Party is helping with furthering the centralized authoritarian controls, and because they're selling a bill of goods that is just outrageous, and people need to stop falling for the lying talking points of them. Like earlier this year, the Republicans in Congress passed a Parent Bill of Rights Act, and basically it was clearly a political move because, of course, the Democrats in the Senate weren't going to approve it, and it wasn't going to get signed by Joe Biden. But basically, the Republican Party and the bill basically said this bill establishes various rights of parents and guardians regarding the elementary or secondary school education of their children. And it basically says, schools need to comply with these requirements to receive federal education funds. It's the funding that matters. Number one, the Republican Party cannot establish any of your rights. Your rights are established when you're born, and they're inherent in you. They're God-given. They're what you're born with. You're born with these rights, and politicians cannot establish rights for you. You have rights by your very nature of being born. And being a human. So the Republicans are telling you we're going to establish these new rights for you, and if you follow what we say, we're going to dangle some money out over you. That's the problem. That's why do we have the issues in the school system that we have today? Why, in response to critical race theory, Donald Trump set up the 1776 Commission. What you do is you stop the federal funding. Critical race theory is there because of the federal overreach in education. The things that you have a problem with, conservatives, in the school system is because the federal government is involved. If you want to combat this, don't further give more power and funding control to the federal government. Just get rid of the funding altogether. The federal government is the problem. It's, again, to bring up a Reagan like it did last week with the I'm from the government and I'm here to help, in the scariest words in the English language. He also talked about in this present time of crisis, the government is the problem. And yet the conservatives keep falling for these tricks by the Republican Party that are just establishing more federal control over education. And it's you got to wake up to that.
Yeah, I know you like quoting Reagan. I'm not going to, but I have a problem with those quotes from Reagan. Is that they are true, but yet he didn't act on them, and I'm not a. That's why I'm not very sympathetic to the Reagan administration. But you're right. On behalf of the critical race theory program that came out of, and then Trump came out with the 776 Commission on that, is the same thing as back in 1919, I forgot when, the Tennessee General Assembly passed the Butler Act, where it denied to teach the idea of evolution and only the idea of creationism. And I mean, again, it's state government. It can do what it pleases. But yet again, why don't you let the kids decide what is real, what is not? If the kid wants to read up on Charles Darwin and then read up on Adam and Eve and the Bible and Leviticus and all that, let them decide. Let them see what is truthful and what is not. I mean, it's open for discussions. You can't seal them just like that, like they did with critical race theory or they did with 776 Commission. In that case, government should not be in charge of education system, because you're always going to have either some Bible thumping individuals or some Clarence Darrow individuals trying to impose their progressive intellectuality and ideas. So maybe that's but yet again, open to interpretation, open to ideas, open to debate, as we have here or wherever. A lively, friendly debate, and says, hey, I don't agree with Charles Darwin, but I yet don't agree with creationism. I don't know where we came from, but let's start the dialogue. And that's what this country needs. Critical race theory, I mean, sadly, this country was founded on, cheap labor and hard labor that we got rid of in 1865. And yet, even after 1865, you had many southern states that still were practicing cheap labor. They were paying, many black Americans, but cheaply and not free. So, we need to learn that, we can't erase history like DeSantis is doing with his new curriculum in here in Florida schools, but we have to learn from them so we don't have to repeat them again. And it's cool for debate and all that. But, my main argument is you don't want the federal government to get involved in any of this, because it just creates more dismay and chaos like they did with critical race theory and the 776 Commission. And one nice point I like to point out is not only the federal government is a problem, teachers union are a big problem. And I saw that when I was in Montana. Teachers union are a problem because they come with this illusion that we're going to help the children, we're going to educate the children. No, they're not. They just want that money to feather their own teachers union benefits and then keep it for themselves. The two problems that I see here is the federal government and labor organizations in the education system that is just ruining and crippling this system. That's the two problems that I see. The federal government and the labor organization in the education system.
Yeah, and just to, I wrote about this a while ago for the Liberty Loft. A whole bunch of quotes from the National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the country, dating back to the early 1900s. And I just want to give one quote from John D. Rockefeller, who was one of the major funders of the NEA back in 1903. He said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." And that there tells me what our system is about. It's about training workers to basically be enslaved to corporate or government masters. And that's what the school system was designed to be. It's not there to create critical thinkers, people who can, make work on their own, that can build their own businesses. It's to create workers, and that's not education. That's at best it's job training, and education is much deeper than job training. It's learning how to think, how to to read and write, and it's not to be a good little trained worker for some boss in a corporation or the federal government. And that's what we get from the teachers unions, and and just to make it clear, I agree with you what you said about Ronald Reagan, that he definitely did not live up to his rhetoric, and that's people should look up the work of Charlotte Iserbyt, who was an education advisor to Ronald Reagan during when he was first elected, and she was in there under the impression that the education advisors would be advising how to get rid of the Department of Education, and she learned really quickly there was no plan to get rid of the Department of Education in the Reagan administration, and she got fired after she leaked some document that exposing that there was no plan to shut down the Department of Education. So I agree with you there. Reagan's that interesting figure in which he said a lot of the right things, but he did not do it when he had the chance. So that might be a good segue into the GOP primary debate, because there's a lot of things that I could agree with a lot of what the candidate said, but I don't trust them. I don't think they mean any of it. But there was also a lot of just nonsense from the debate.
Oh no, exactly, and that's a great gateway entry to our next segment on the GOP, the first GOP debate, and then continuation discussion of the 2024 elections. And Ronald Reagan, always spoke the good game and spoke very conservatively, and always spoke about states' rights and state sovereignty and less federal government. But yet, like you said, he never did anything to change that. He never acted on it. And from all the candidates that sounded like Ronald Reagan is the governor of North Dakota, where he's the only one that quoted the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. I don't think Reagan ever quoted the 10th Amendment, but Doug Burgum did. And again, anybody entering into the federal field of politics, into a position in the federal government, I don't know. I just got to really think long and hard if I really want to register to vote to cast my vote for Doug Burgum or whoever, because Reagan really, to me, set the stench of corruption and lying and hypocrisy. That's why I really rarely vote. If Barry Goldwater would have, if we would have set the standard of Barry Goldwater running for president in 1964 and won that election in 1964, then I would say Reagan would have been different. But, they went with Nixon, which, again, Nixon expanded the federal government tremendously. Ford, he didn't do anything. Carter established the Department of Education. Now we're stuck with it. And then Reagan, came along with his golden voice of federalism and conservatism, but he never really acted on it. So in today's political candidates now, it's all about personality. It's who, how do I look good, and how do I get to win votes and win support? Not votes, win support. And, the skinny kid with the weird last name, that what's he doing there? That's, which again, talking about Vivek Ramaswamy, there's an article on CBS or CNBC that until this day he was an unaffiliated voter. He was not even a Republican or Democrat. He was unaffiliated. So how can I trust somebody like that he's been unaffiliated? That now he's running as a Republican. Trump Trump was never Republican. Trump was a Democrat, reform, Republican, reform, Democrat. So this kid's an unaffiliated voter. Give me a break here. I mean, so I have no interest in this election again. I will still be abstaining. How about you, Seth?
Yeah, I have absolutely no plans to vote for any federal office. I think it's a waste of time. I don't trust any of them. It's just the federal government is so corrupt. There's no cleaning up the problems from Washington. What we need to do is clean up the local level and get elected officials locally, even the state government, who are willing to basically stand up to the federal government and say, no, we're not going to comply with your unconstitutional mandates on us. And people who are going to stand up and say, please stop stealing our money so that we can keep it here in whether it's Oklahoma, Florida, Illinois, wherever you live. We need to keep our money here and stop giving it to the middleman in Washington, D.C., who's going to divvy it up to their buddies. That's the only place where elections have any real meaning. And even there, it's more important that free individuals, free Americans, start taking responsibility in their own lives. And, even if you don't have good local and state elected officials, you can still do stuff on your own to escape the system as much as possible. And, with this debate, the majority of it was just pure personality. You brought up Doug Burgum, who was the only one to invoke the Constitution that I can remember. I saw the reviews from all the talking heads after, and they wondered why was he even on the stage, because he was kind of boring. He wasn't. He didn't have the personality that they want, and that's what elections have become. It's become personalities, and the American people should feel ashamed of themselves if that's what moves them to vote for somebody. The personality is, if we wanted characteristics that really matter, to me, humility is a very important characteristic for a president. But instead, we want the most arrogant, bombastic person to be the president. I mean, and that's what we've seen with, Joe Biden's pretty arrogant and bombastic. Donald Trump was, of course, very arrogant and bombastic. So was Obama. So was, maybe I'll give George W. Bush a little more credit for acting not as bombastic, but he was too. But I just view all of these people as actors on a stage, and they don't really believe in anything. They're in it for themselves. They're in it for some agenda that does not benefit us, the people. And it's just, I think it's very manipulative. It's really, everybody's so engaged in these types of debates and stuff, and nobody's doing stuff for themselves at home. They're just waiting for the next the next elected dictator to tell us how we should live our lives, and we need to kind of ignore. I mean, I wrote a piece, and granted, I watched the debate, but I wrote a piece basically about ignoring the political circus, on the morning of that debate. And, I said this is effectively silly season is beginning in full tonight with the first presidential debate. And, basically what I wrote, I think effectively was true of what happened, that there were no real discussions on real issues like central bank digital currencies, 15-minute cities, and COVID, and how are we going to bring to account those who locked us down? And of course, nobody on that stage would have talked about bringing people to justice because they were all guilty of the COVID lockdowns, and so it was really just a circus, as we've talked about. That it's circus, it's theater, and people need to wake up to that.
Yeah, it is a political circus, and with going back to Doug Burgum, who's a governor, yeah, he's very quiet, and I stated a quote saying that silence will get things done more than a loudmouth, and in referencing to Calvin Coolidge selling Calvin Coolidge got more things done than Trump or Biden. And so maybe that's, it's Doug Burgum who's kind of quiet, and maybe that's what we need. We don't need a loudmouth. We don't need a Chris Christie then creating corruption with the bridge to nowhere and all that, which, I prefer executives running for a chief executive position than a senator or a vice president. Well, even though Mike Pence was governor of Indiana, but I don't think he's that. I think he was congressman first and governor, and I don't think he really understands the federalism wise of this country. But a person like Doug Burgum, maybe he can be a Calvin Coolidge, quiet, able, will get the things done, and that's what we need. We don't need a loudmouth. We don't need an American Idol president. We need someone who will just keep his head down and not really do a lot. That's what the president's supposed to do. A president's not here to be my leader. We don't have a leader like there is in England or in France or in Spain or in Argentina right now with the right-wing loudmouth that's going over there. We don't need a loudmouth leader. We just need a quiet leader that will get things done and go things what is accordance with the Constitution. And that's where I brought up that story where, the tourist driver from Croatia had a different idea of the United States. He always thought us being united. Yeah, we are united, but it's united with certain rules and laws that apply to different types of government. And so we don't need a loudmouth dictator to take over. I'd rather have 1,000 loudmouth dictators in Congress than just one, because with 1,000 you can control them. With one you can't control. You couldn't control Julius Caesar in the beginning. You couldn't control Napoleon or anybody else like that. So, this thing of Barack Obama saying that, I got a pen, I got a phone, or Trump saying I alone can do this, or Vivek Ramaswamy praising Trump and doing exactly what Trump is doing, I don't want that. I mean, I know that Vivek has no chance to get the nomination because, he's a nobody, and I'm glad he's a nobody, so he's not going to get it. But it's dangerous that's what many Trumpers and many people are seeking, and it worries me. It really does, and that's why I really, maybe Doug Burnham is a good choice if he doesn't say anything else popular, like I'm going to pass a national ban on abortion, or I'm gonna create funding for this, or take funding for that, and just focus on what he needs to be focused on. Maybe I will vote for him. I don't know, maybe for the first time, but as of now I'm still abstaining because he hasn't really he's only said one thing that kind of intrigued my interest, that I may vote for him, but he's got to keep on talking the language of Coolidge, the language of Cleveland, of a federal government that it's only meant to do certain powers and nothing else. So we'll see how it goes. But, as of now, to me, I'll see how Doug Burnham goes, and the rest of them, they just need to find their own TV show and just, do their own TV show on Twitter like Tucker Carlson.
For me, even if there was a candidate that I really supported, I don't know what the use in voting is, because I don't know that they can get anything done. That's a sad reality. I mean, the last president that I was excited to vote for, presidential candidate, was Ron Paul, and even if Ron Paul had won out of some miracle, I don't know that he would have been able to accomplish anything, because it's so corrupt down in D.C. we really need the people to start buying into liberty again if we ever want to see elections, especially the federal elections, to matter again. And that's really where the battle is winning the hearts and minds of Americans to desiring liberty and not being controlled by government. But you just look at a guy like Vivek Ramaswamy, who on the debate stage, one of his first things was to accuse everybody on the stage of being bought and paid for. But he was not bought and paid for, which first off, I agree with him that they're all bought and paid for, but so is he. This guy made his fortune by selling big pharma drugs. He's bought and paid for by the big pharma companies that now conservatives are waking up to the corruption on that side of things with the COVID shots. But he is just he's a good liar. He puts up a good act about how everybody else is corrupt, but he's the saint on the stage, and that's what you're getting from these people is generally it's an act. It's just trying to convince you of their lies, and it's just this is why it's silly season. I mean, we're just presented with a bunch of actors trying to convince us of stuff that just isn't true. And that's why people should ignore it as much as they can and focus on bettering their own lives without going to government to tell them how to live. And that's what I hope people start doing.
You brought up Ron Paul, and I was a Ron Paul supporter prior to his run in 2008. One issue that I have with Ron Paul is that he's very much like, he was a national politician, but, he started bringing up, and then his son, Rand Paul, started to spread the chant, abolish the Fed, or audit the Fed. And years later, I realized that that's a very immature and childish rant and chant, because Congress abolishes the Fed. In a couple of months, with the Democratic Congress, they'll spring up a new central bank system, and they'll never audit the Fed. So that was a ridiculous chant, and that's the chant that we're getting here now. I mean, I like Ron Paul. Ron Paul's a very constitutional kind of guy, but his chanting was wrong. He should have chanted to repeal the 16th Amendment. With repealing that amendment, all those laws that were passed due to that amendment become null and void. And I know it's a long road ahead, but if you want to chant something that works, you got to do it exactly how Congress acts, because without that 16th Amendment, they won't have a Federal Reserve Act. They won't have a Revenue Act of 1913. So, that's why, I kind of lost touch with Ron Paul with those type of chants. And then now seeing in 2016 with Trump saying lock her up or drain the swamp, he didn't drain 1 inch of it. He just clogged it more. And the same thing this Vivek guy is, and Christie and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. They're continuing to clog the swamp and not really drain the swamp. So I don't really buy these chants that people say, because they are just out there to buy just want to have a popular catchphrase. Something that, Jack Abramoff, the convicted lobbyist, said that DC is like Hollywood, but with ugly faces. And that's true. It's like a celebrity with ugly faces, and trying to find a popular catchphrase. And that's why, to me, all these candidates in 2016 and Yes We Can and all that, Hope and Change, are just catchy catchphrases just to get the people's attention that I really don't. Yeah, it's no interest to me, even from Ron Paul.
I just speaking of just being actors, I just encourage people to look up Cambridge Analytica. and Donald Trump, and you go back to, the 2016 campaign, and there was this group called Cambridge Analytica that was basically going through Facebook information to try and come up with catchphrases for Donald Trump to try out at his rallies, and that's exactly how it worked. They went out to rallies, tried out different catchphrases, and if it caught on, Donald Trump would stick to it. I mean it is professional wrestling, and Donald Trump has a history with professional wrestling with Vince McMahon and the WWE. So I mean, this is what politics has become, and it's so manipulative. It's so deceptive, and it's in your face if you just learn about how these guys come up with their policies and their talking points. It's so clear what they're doing, and people don't want to hear it. They want to be caught up in the moment and just cheering on their guy. I mean, I got to say this. I remember back during the 2016 campaign, I was actually at a conservative convention where we were voting on who this organization should endorse for president, and I was a Rand Paul supporter, and I'm not a big fan of his anymore for a number of reasons. But at the time, I was a Rand Paul supporter, but Donald Trump spoke at that convention, so I've seen Donald Trump speak in person, and I was with a couple other friends of mine who were both Ted Cruz supporters, which I'm not a big fan of Ted Cruz, never have been, but I watched the crowd just going along with Donald Trump, and I was worried just looking at the crowd and how they're just enamored with this guy. And that in and of itself, even if Donald Trump said something I agreed with, the way people were just, whooping and applauding and just so excited about this guy, it really made me feel uneasy. And I'm like, this is not healthy. We've got to stop looking towards these politicians to be our saviors. They're not our saviors. We need to start taking responsibility for our own lives, and that's the biggest problem, the biggest hurdle that we're facing in this country is there's absolutely no responsibility anymore. And that's to the individuals. There's no personal responsibility, and the government doesn't take responsibility for anything that it does. It's always passing the buck off. It's always somebody else. I can't stand listening to, conservatives blaming everything on the Democrats or liberals blaming everything on the Republicans. The finger pointing has got to stop, and people have to start taking responsibility. It's really that simple.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And, the way that Trump spoke with these catchy phrases, I still couldn't believe that he was elected president. I mean, it's not that I wanted Hillary either, but there was not, I didn't vote for either of them because I thought they were both useless by name and by policy and everything else. So, but people fell for that. And, the same thing you brought, just one last topic. I know we're running out of time, but you brought up Cambridge Analytica, and they were also, I think, they were the ones that also invented the catchphrases for Brexit. And one that I kind of stuck with it was the group with not with Nigel Farage, but with Boris Johnson. They said that take the money out of the EU and put in the NHS, the National Health Service. So you're going to take the money out of the EU, which is this useless organization, and you're going to take that money and put it into the national healthcare system. I mean, and then people bought into that why don't you just return the money back to the taxpayers of England? And that's what many people don't understand here. Don't give it to don't give my money to pet projects in Arkansas or Kansas or wherever. Why don't you just give the money back to me or back to us, the taxpayer? But again, they can't. So in this election, let's see how Doug Burnham continues. If he continues being a good constitutional conservative, like a Cleveland or a Coolidge, then I will register to vote. If he continues to keep that word, I mark my words, I will vote for Doug Burgum. But we'll just see. But apart from the other ones, whoever else is the nominee, I will abstain. I will not abstain if Doug Burgum sets the tone to Coolidge or Cleveland. And that's my last thoughts of it. Do your research and vote for the best possible constitutional candidate out there, whether liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. Just don't vote for the trigger happy populist. Vote for someone who really speaks the language that you want to hear.
Yeah, I'll just say, I don't intend to vote at all in the federal elections. Focus your attention on local and state politics. But if you are going to vote, like you said, listen to their tone and are they listen closely to them. Listen to all of them, and I think it's so clear that they're almost all actors. They're all trying to set narratives, and they're not there to get the government out. In fact, I think Mike Pence literally said that the government has a role in fixing all of our problems. It was something to that extent that Mike Pence said, and I was amazed. I'm like, how am I hearing this? And it's this is the problem. These politicians are so arrogant. They really think that they're gods who can run our lives, and that's the problem. And that's it. That is one of the reasons why Doug Burgum came across as decent to me. I don't trust any of them. That's just I've come to the point that I will not trust any politician unless I know them personally, I guess. But we need to stop trusting these people and cleaning up our own lives. And that's my final thought.
Yeah, well, we'll be back next Sunday, and we'll keep on talking as the election unfolds to see who remains and who doesn't remain, and keep us listening to us, and let's hope that our voices changes your mind, or at least opens up a little more with a little more constitutionalism out there. So to all of us, from the both of us, have yourself a wonderful week ahead, and have a great night.
Good night.